There is no need to be afraid, little flock, for it has pleased your Father to give you the kingdom. Some verses have an echo in the memory banks. It just happens that this one has one that takes me back to childhood. We were at the time in Spain, and it was about this time of year, and as an evangelical Baptist, the question of the importance of Scripture, even on holidays, was there, and the daily Bible reading was kind of important, because when one is camping in an alien land, one has a few familiar points, and the Bible would be one. Therefore, these verses coming out of Scripture were kind of important, and it was upsetting. Why? Because this verse at that point was a bit nagging. What was going on? We were in a massively Catholic country, especially at the time. This was in the 60s, and there was something going on which I wasn't used to. We were going from town to town, from village to village, from city to city, from cathedral to cathedral, from parish church to parish church, from tiny chapel to tiny chapel. And there wasn't a single Baptist chapel in sight. There wasn't a Methodist one, there wasn't an Anglican church. There was no Presbyterian presence. It was just one massive same thing everywhere. Ooh. And this verse then came out of the Scripture. Why? There is no need to be afraid, little flock. And the problem coming to mind was this: am I in that little flock? What about our situation? Aren't we a bit little when we're not even minimally represented in a whole country? And this monolith around is upsettingly powerful and uniform. Each church says the same thing, does the same thing, and is the same thing. I park that for a minute. This is the feast day not only of Pope Sixtus II and his companions, except for Lawrence, who was martyred later. It's also St. Cajetan, who happens to be important to us because Bishop Cayetano, that's Cajetan, ordained us, and his brother also was a bishop. And he was our superior because we were under him, being yet of diocesan right, and therefore he'd receive our vows and look after us, and he did so well. And in fact, when I came to Ireland, he wrote to me, and he wanted my prayer, as he always had. He was a good pastor of souls. Anyway, Cajetan was somebody who was raised up to do what? As one of those that the Spirit of God raised up to apply what was to be the counterbalance of what we had come from, the Counter-Reformation, or the Catholic Reformation. He was born at a time when he was needed, and the providence of God used him. He was born in an area which, possibly due to the likes of himself, has remained very Catholic and practicing in Italy. It's the area of Vicenza, the Veneto area. It's a good Catholic area. And from there, he did get involved, I understand, with the workings of the church at curial level in Rome, but he didn't actually become a bishop, but a founder. And he applied liturgically and catechetically the thrust of reform coming from the Council of Trent, which led to the founding of what was going to be a new model and a typical part of what the Spirit of God was doing. I'll try and explain. Historically, the great force of the church had been the stability of the great monastic blocks. What kept them stable was that vow of stability, and we still had something of that as Premonstratensians. The structure was still there, and you were in one building until death. The mendicant movement, the Franciscans and Dominicans, cracked that to some extent because they had lots of convents and they could be moved around. They also did not quite, especially the Franciscans, have the same attention given to solemn liturgy. The Dominicans kept a bit more. They had more monastic liturgy than the Franciscans, insofar as they have today maintained the actual singing of the Divine Office in a fairly monastic style, and they do it well. But then, this period, which is a little later in time, is going to need a new model, and the Lord raises up, at the same period more or less, several great founders. We have in Rome itself the Apostle of Rome, St. Philip Neri, who cracks the mold completely and is very charismatic. We have St. Ignatius of Loyola, which, by the way, more than people think, is not just as active as people think. It's actually active contemplation, and that other bit is forgotten. The Jesuits in their origin have a certain mystic streak. So that was one which hugely changed things. Why? No common office. And ordination was delayed as far as possible, that is, the subdiaconate when the obligation started, so as not to have the weight of the breviary, and therefore they could study a lot. And then this whole plethora of what we call clerks regular, canons regular also are linked with them, in which what is going on is they're reproducing the life of the apostles. Therefore, a very simple model, but it gives a great power. Why? Priests, students, young people are going to live together, grow together in the Lord, be ordained, and go out like torpedoes, and they're going to be a huge power in the Counter-Reformation. They're going to be clean and pure and kept from what might tempt them if they're alone. And I just open a slight parenthesis. My doctoral thesis was based partly on this, because you have to make a point, don't you, when you get to the end of a doctoral thesis, and it was all about basically the proposition of an updating of this model, because what is needed in our time is a safeguard for the priesthood. The apostolic life, priests living together with the Lord, are protected. They create beauty together if they care for liturgy, as did these, by the way. And then they can go out, but come back to base. It's a great safeguard, because one of the great throttling threats for the priesthood right now is isolation. And it's getting worse, because a priest might not see another priest from 1 week to another. He's always with lay people, and you know what that can mean. I close the parenthesis. This then was the beginning of the Theatines, and the way in which preaching was found to be crucial also was something which precisely was coming back to where I was coming from. The power of preaching was what we had. It was all we had practically. But here you have it happening within the Catholic Church, orders being born to preach. And that also is for our times. What's happening in Ireland? What John Milton talked about in an Anglican context in the 1600s. The hungry sheep look up and are not fed. The way that the Irish people is being led, not by what is said in the pulpit, but from what is being said in the pulpit of Satan, the goggle box, and all that goes on a screen, is phenomenal. They're easily led when they're not given sufficient nourishment. And how can they be given sufficient nourishment if people give by their bodily language signals to the preacher that it's time he winds up? After 5 minutes, I think we know what happens. He gets reported, he gets complaints, murmuring and grumbling, and he picks it up. So what can he do? He does what he feels probably most of them in church want. So they don't get anything. And woe betide any preacher nowadays in Ireland who says anything hardly resembling something serious. In fact, we've got to the stage now when a huge world event this month is going to be probably a forum for what's crept in. There's a huge interest in the media in one particular aspect, the redefining of the family, and they're giving a platform for that side of things. I think you know what I mean. And this is clever, because you watch what the cameras do. They'll zoom into a rainbow somewhere, and that'll go around the world.